I'm setting myself the task of trying to learn Esperanto for the purposes of this, because that's another interesting thing, is universal languages and made-up languages. That's to say, they're a bit like Brasilia or Milton Keynes are made-up cities. Instead of organically growing in the way you feel a community should, they've been actually planned. And the most famous of those is Esperanto, though of course there are fictional ones that have become quite successful. The most successful at the moment is Klingon, of course, where there is a degree course, and as you probably know, and so I think someone's doing a musical in Las Vegas, all in Klingon. I mean, it is genuinely, it's a genuine, linguists have genuinely gone into it, and it has the full range of structures, verbal structures and prepositional and pronominal structures that languages must have, substantives and all the very extraordinary things that languages need in order to express ideas. Some of them quite complex. And the newest one is the one that's used in Avatar by the people of that planet in Avatar, which again, and actually we're speaking to the person who devised that language, because it's a very interesting thing to do. If only, he only lived around the corner from here, if only Anthony Burgess was still alive, because of course he devised a language too for a film called The Quest for Fire. Do you remember that? Which was like the early, and he'd sort of devised a very early sort of caveman language, a sort of language, as it were, which is exciting. Now, there's so much to think about in language, and the more you do, and there's language in art, of course, in poetry, and there's language in persuasion, in advertising, and in rhetoric, and there's the way language develops, and I'm afraid there's language extinction, as you probably know, almost at a sort of similar rate to the extinction of species and so on. The biodiversity of the world's languages is under terrible threat. I was in Australia and talking to some people, to a linguist there, as well as to a member of an Aboriginal community, about the disappearances of their languages. I mean, a huge number of discrete and individual languages in Australia alone. And then you get real mysteries, like in New Guinea, there are thousands of languages. And you can literally have a valley where on one side they speak one language and on the other another, and those languages are not in any way related. They have no common ancestral link. Philologists study them and see that they are utterly separate. Language also tells you an enormous amount about the human mind. For example, colour theory is immensely important in trying to understand. One of the most important questions linguists have faced over the past 100 years is whether growing up with one language that is your native tongue, your langue maternelle, as they say here, whether that alters the way you think, whether it has an effect on the way you think, on the way you see the world, the way you apprehend the world. It's called the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which has been hugely rubbished over the last 30 years. It was almost as fraudulent. But a man, a great linguist in his own way, but these days, by academic standards, something of an amateur, who claimed that the Hopi Indians had no sense of time or no sense of distance, or different senses of this and different senses of that, and that it altered entirely the way they saw the world because of their language. And this became a popular idea. And there's this sort of Orwellian idea that if you take the word freedom out of the language, then you take the concept out of the language. Most linguists now don't believe that, and there's no evidence to suggest that if you're German, you're better able to express abstract ideas or philosophical thoughts than if you're Finnish, say. That all the works of Wittgenstein or of Voltaire can be translated into any language, and an intelligent person can understand them. I mean, there are, of course, you see, this idea of a primitive language not having the same vocabulary, not being able to express things, and it's certainly true that we have, in English, we have a massive vocabulary, way larger than any other language, by really a huge amount. But does that make us a more sophisticated, complex people than the Norse or the Sicilians or the any? I don't think so, to be honest. I think the culture in which we live, the speed in which the amount of communication we have, which is a factor of technology, certainly gives us new things, and that's another thing that interests people enormously, is what technology is doing to language, whether it's dumbing us down, whether the abbreviations and things that you referred to earlier are somehow cheap and coarsening the language. I don't believe that, and I would urge people to look at some of the greatest letters ever written in the English language by Lord Byron, who was a fantastic letter writer, and partly through economy. He was not necessarily the most economical person, but letters were crossed, and because they were very expensive to send, especially as he was a lot of the time in Italy and Greece, and sending them to England cost a fortune by courier, and they were to the number of pages, and so he would abbreviate in exactly the same way that and for the same reason. Paper was there was a lack of bandwidth, the bandwidth being the amount of paper you could send, and so he filled it with as much as he could, crossing it. So you write like that, and then you write the other way like that, so that you and your would become YR, and so on. And just the same sort of thing, just abbreviating. Now, was Byron illiterate? I really don't think so. Hard to find anyone more literate, in fact. The point is, you don't speak. We can change our discourses as we change our clothes. You can't judge someone by the way they're speaking when they're speaking with their friends. Sensible people have a different language for different people in different circumstances. I swear in front of my friends. I wouldn't swear in front of my great aunt. Upset her. That would just be rude. And similarly, people who moan about political correctness, well, I don't think they'd use some of the words they use that are politically incorrect when in the presence of the minority whose word would offend them, because it's just bad manners. And that's actually what it comes down to very often, this whole thing about political correctness or swearing. It's just good manners. It's considering the other person. It's considering your interlocutor, thinking about their feelings. That's what being a decent person's about.